Hey kids, today we're going to talk about a common problem with four-way switches. I get this question a lot. The four-way Telecaster mod, and there's several different four-way mods for Telecasters. There's probably the most common one is series parallel switching, but then you've also got four-way Eldred Esquire mods and various things. But in any case, any Telecaster mod with a four-way switch. It seems like, and like I said, I get this question a lot. It seems like sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. People run into issues with it. And I've been meaning to do this video for a while and show you why that is. It actually has nothing to do with your wiring ability. So let's look at some switches here. Now this is a standard five-way switch, actually. It's not a three-way. But for the purposes of what I'm going to show you, we're going to call it a three-way because the length of throw on a three-way and a five-way is the same. And when I say the length of throw, I mean if we put this pivot at the middle there, how far over the lever goes in each direction is the same on a three-way as it is a five-way. But on a four-way, we'll try to line this up for the camera. The four-way has a longer length of throw. I'm trying to get this lined up here in front of my camera lens, dead on. See, it leans over farther. So the four-way, the lever, leans over even farther. And so what you're doing is this part of the switch here is hitting the edges of the slot. So the way these switches work, if you look at this big thick metal tab right there, that's the part that moves as you rotate the lever. And it clicks into each one of these points. But what happens is sometimes you'll have everything wired up like you think you're supposed to, and not all of the switch positions seem to work right, and you'll think that you wired it wrong. And you may even go buy another four-way harness from somebody like me, and that comes already wired, and you put that in, and it still doesn't work, and you cannot figure out why. And I'm going to show you why. This is a $20 genuine Fender control plate. This is the actual stuff. And this is a $5 China control plate. The four-way works like a champ in this one. But in the $20 Fender control plate, it's a little sketchy. And here's why. We're going to screw this one in. When I get over to the far end here, you notice it clicks into the middle one okay, but when I get over to the far end, oh, look at that. Sometimes it's trying to touch this second one at the same time. And it'll happen on both ends. So why is that? Well, there are differences in these plates. This is a Squire plate. You'll notice it's got the smaller holes. This is a USA spec plate, meaning it's got the larger 3/8 holes, but it's also the wider, typically Chinese one. But if we line these up with the switch holes together, and I'll even put a screw in here so that we can verify that we have the switch holes lined up together. Look at the difference in the length of the slot. The Fender one is the one on the bottom down here. So you can actually see both ends of the slot through the slot on this one. So what that's doing is because this slot is so narrow, it's blocking the switch from clicking all the way down into its seated position because the throw on these four-ways is longer. Now, if you try to put a three-way on any of these, it'll work like a champ. You'll never have an issue because the length of throw is not critical. But if you have a four-way where the length of throw is just a little bit longer than the thickness of the plate, you know, the Fender one is super thin, and the aftermarket ones are typically about double the thickness. The thickness of the plate comes into play, and more importantly, the length of the slots come into play, because that's going to block it on the ends. As it's sitting in there, it's going to be hitting the end of the slot before it seats all the way into position. Let's say you wanted to use some fancy, wood control plate. A four-way would never in a million years work on this without lengthening this slot a lot to give it, because as you increase the thickness, you lower where the switch is, which increases the amount of space that you have to have on the end. So, the length of throw, as you lower this, because of the thickness of it, keeps moving out this way. So what brought all this on today, customer recently contacted me. This is not one that I built. He had done this mod himself and was convinced that he did it wrong. And ordered a four-way mod from me and sent me everything for me to install it for him because he just was convinced that he screwed it all up. And he didn't. The good news for this customer is he's going to get most of his order refunded because there's absolutely nothing wrong with these parts. These are brand new parts. There's nothing wrong with all I'm going to do is unsolder everything and clean them up and resolder it. Just to kind of clean up some of the solder joints. But the main issue was that if you look at the switch, and we'll look specifically back here, this switch isn't even coming close to contacting. That's fully seated right there. So we're not even anywhere near getting into our final switch positions, which of course this is replicated on both sides. So you've got, 4 different contacts you're not making contact with. And if you look at this, the switch is not really seated. So first of all, we've got a super thick pickguard in comparison to a control plate. So we've got the thickest possible material, and it's already not seated. There's like a little piece of sticker or adhesive paper, something caught up in here, and it's just not really seated well. This may be an aftermarket pickguard where the holes weren't drilled precisely, so it didn't quite seat in there. But because it's not seated all the way down, the length of throw is just not getting anywhere close to being able to hit its length of throw. And if we take this off, well, actually, we don't even have to take it off. So if we look at the fender plate, the slot is actually not even as wide as the fender plate. So there's this teeny weeny little slot here, which again, if this were a three-way switch, you'd never notice an issue because the three-way length of throw would fit in here just fine. But as soon as you try to put a four-way in here, it doesn't work. So this guy was convinced that he screwed this all up when in fact it's just a matter of we need to come in here and open this slot up a little bit on each side. So probably about 1.5 millimeters to 2 millimeters on each side of opening that slot up with a Dremel tool, and this thing's going to work like a champ. So if you invest your money and your time in a four-way mod and it's not quite working out like you think it should, don't be so quick to jump and think that you've wired it incorrectly or somehow mess something up. It's entirely possible that the problem is just what you're mounting it to. And it may be that you need to get a Dremel tool and open the slots up a little bit on your plate or your pickguard or something like that, or use a thinner plate or a thicker plate or things like that. But the main thing is just look at, before you take anything apart, just look at your contact and make sure that it is clicking into each position and only that one position through each of the 4 throws, and you'll probably spot your issue. So hope that helped.